All right, welcome in. This is the Grid Draft Show. I'm Mike Guido. That's EJ Savage. We're back again for another episode here on a Wednesday night. Joining us today is Devin Jackson of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Devin, it's great to have you with us, man. How you feeling?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Feel pretty good after coming off last week's Senior Bowl, and now looking towards the NFL Combine that starts at the end of this month. So, lots going on. Obviously, Eagles and Chiefs playing the Super Bowl on Sunday. So, once that game ends, it's kind of full steam ahead on draft season. So, I always tell people this is the best time of year. Everyone's kind of focused on a draft at this point, outside of like the upcoming free agency, but everyone's looking towards the future and seeing the next crop of prospects. And, uh, you know, for me, I do my homework early and I kind of enjoy the ride at this time of year.
Yeah, certainly. It's certainly true. And I let me tell you something. It's draft season already for me. I am as bored as anybody can be about the Super Bowl matchup. Call me a casual. I don't care. I'm iffy on the Chiefs and Eagles this year for the Super Bowl. That's just me though. How you feeling today, bud?
I'm feeling good, man. We've got a guy who is who puts his homework in, knows these guys. I think he said 3 Senior Bowls being there in a row, 5 covering it for his paper, and he's a guy that puts in the work. So he's gonna have some great insight for us that kind of do this as a side gig, you and I. But we still have a lot of fun with it. We still break down these players and go in depth and try to make our teams better. But he's looking at the broad perspective, and so it's going to be fun hearing Devin talk about these guys.
Yeah, certainly true about that. All right, so let's dive right in, right? So talking about the Senior Bowl, right? So I kind of want to, and this kind of leads into what I think EJ is going to ask next, but I'll just leave it as a blanket statement. How important is the Senior Bowl leading up to the draft?
For guys that aren't seen as like consensus top 5, top 10 picks, it's important for whoever steps on the field. There's always questions around prospects and what they can and can't do. Seeing those small school prospects against guys, is more comparable to the NFL. Seeing the quarterbacks there and seeing them thrown into a different environment. A lot of them played a lot of shotgun in their college careers, and they spent a lot of time under center in the weekend Senior Bowl. So everyone has something to gain from the Senior Bowl, even if you practice for a few days, even if you are a late entry, because you get the time in front of NFL teams, and it's the first time NFL teams can really start to build relationships with players. You look at last year and number of players that participated in the Senior Bowl went in the first round. I use the Eagles as an example because obviously, I got to see Quinyon Mitchell at the Senior Bowl last year, and the Eagles ended up selecting him in the first round. Tyler Guyton for the Dallas Cowboys went to the Senior Bowl and ended up going the first round, and those teams met with them, both of those players, down the Senior Bowl. So, I think from an on-field perspective, and maybe some of the drills, we'll go through as we talk about it. Maybe some of the drills aren't always necessarily designed for both position groups that are going up against each other to benefit. But for the most part, you just want to see guys against that comparable competition, how they move in person, how fluid they are, how well they sustain blocks. If you're looking at offensive linemen, defensive linemen, how well do they disengage and still make plays? So you can go down the list of every position and see what is important, even for the kickers and for the long snappers. It's an important week for NFL teams to see them up close. So it's definitely a benefit, I would say, and just one piece of the puzzle, obviously, to the NFL draft collective and the way that you evaluate guys and how teams do homework on guys. Obviously, you still have the pro days and combine, and you bring them in for 30 meetings. So I take it as one piece of the draft evaluation process, but it's certainly an important one for guys that do participate to show what they did on tape matches, or what they did on tape isn't indicative to everything that they can do on the field.
Right.
Yeah, Dev, talk about your process of how you scope in on a player first. break down the player before you even head to the Senior Bowl, and then how you kind of marry in what you see in the Senior Bowl and bring that into your profile and your eventual grade. Obviously, you have the combine pending, but how do you mix all of that stuff, and what's your starting process to getting these guys' names on a list?
Yeah, so starting process for me, it starts in the summer, and you'll see, a lot of watch list goes out from the Senior Bowl, towards the end of the summer, the Senior Bowl and Shrine Bowl will put their watch list together on guys to watch, but you'll see names kind of flown around. There'll be guys even from the previous year that you watch while you're watching tape. They'll make a few plays and you like write them down. So it's really a compilation of a lot of different things from making lists of guys that you see that maybe aren't draft eligible yet for the next year. Some of the guys that have their name buzzed, some guys that are just stars in college football. It's kind of a collection of those things. But in the summer for me at least, you I don't want to say you grade a little bit lighter, but you're a little bit more open minded to what this player could be. So your grades are maybe a little bit looser, a little bit more generous than maybe you end up with. But you kind of cast a wide net, at least for me, so that the player can go either way, right? They can exceed your expectations, or maybe they underwhelm it a little bit. And then from there, you go through the season. For me, I watch and have a list of guys that I go back and look at on a week to week basis, just to see what the progress they've made. Things that they've done in big games. In those big games on the calendar, you want to see how they perform. A big one for me, like the LSU South Carolina game is a huge game. You got two LSU tackles in Emory Jones and Will Campbell, a defensive line that has a bunch of South Carolina's defensive line. There's a bunch of guys that are going to go on to be really good players. You think about Kyle Kennard, TJ Sanders, who had a really good week at the Senior Bowl, Tonka Hemingway, who went to the Shrine Bowl. So, and then you got Demetrius Knight at linebacker. So you got so many guys in these head-to-head matchups during the season, and you watch those games, and then you go back and evaluate them, and it kind of all goes into some notes that you take on these players. And then by the end of the season, you kind of compile the notes. Maybe you do one or two more games, and then you have it ready to go for the Senior Bowl. But then when it comes to the Senior Bowl, you take those notes you have and just see if they check off those boxes, or do you have new questions that arise? Do they look as fast as they do on tape? Do they move as well as they do on tape? What were they asked to do on their film? Does it translate? I think a perfect example is Shamar Stewart. He's asked a lot to play, like 4-eye and 3-tech and being kind of that 3-4 defensive end at Texas A&M. Well, he's probably going to be a 4-3 defensive end at the NFL level and actually be able to face against tackles and not just against guards and interior offensive linemen. You saw over the course of the two practices he did participate in the Senior Bowl, that he can handle that. He can not only do it at a really good pace, and he moves so much better even in person versus than what he does on tape. And sometimes that has a lot to do with players thinking a little bit more if they're not in their natural position. So you kind of really take all of that into account. You try to figure out, like, what are the things that you see in person? Do they match what you see on tape? Are they standing out as you thought they would coming into the week? And if they didn't, kind of what went wrong, and is this a concern moving forward? So again, it's another piece of the puzzle to the evaluation. And maybe you go back and there's some guys that you underrated a little bit on tape, that they look much better in the Senior Bowl practice setting. I think running backs and safeties and linebackers are always tough to gauge during practices, but then you see in the games that they can do a little bit more. Ali Gordon comes to mind as a guy that didn't really stand out too much in practice, but you saw in the game setting he looked way better because it suits his skill set a little bit better. So I think you got to take into consideration that you're really the Senior Bowl practices, at least for me, are for the trench guys, offensive and defensive linemen, because they actually are the ones that get to go live. They're the ones that actually get to go full go, and you can actually see, how they handle different body types and different speed of linemen, maybe power linemen versus finesse linemen. Like, so much goes into that. So that's why I enjoy watching trench play. because they're always live and always full go. Even if they're in shells, practice shorts and shoulder pads, they still had to have that initial contact and initial pop. So I think a lot goes into it. Kind of taking a step back, but you kind of just take everything with a grain of salt. That you know does it at the end, the tape still has to matter. Even if you having a phenomenal Senior Bowl week, the tape should still be the most important thing. And if it doesn't match, then you have more questions than answers coming out of the week, and maybe you have to go back and dig a little more.
Yeah, I think you say that, and it's extremely important, right? Because listen, I'm not going to talk about myself as if I was some prime time potential college athlete, because I wasn't, right? I'm 5'11", and not very, I have short arms and short fingers and whatever. Like, I was never going to make it to the NFL or Major League Baseball or anything like that. I wasn't ever going to do any of that. But I did play with a lot of guys that did get recruited or all that stuff. And a lot of the times what they would say is, and again, I think this kind of gets lost for some of the people that maybe follow the draft, but maybe not as intensely as people like you and people like us, is that game tape is so much more important, I think, than anything else. Only because, like if you look at, like, I grew up with guys that were like, listen, I put up videos of myself taking batting practice. I took my, whatever. And they said, I would get college coaches and stuff that would say, I could care less about any of that. Send me 15 minutes of you actually in a game. Like, that's the stuff that actually matters. And like, uncut 15 minutes of you in a game, right? Playing the field, watching body language, all of that stuff. Like, that's the stuff that matters. I want to kind of direct it towards this because you mentioned his name, and I missed the episode last week or 2 weeks ago. I had the flu a couple of weeks ago, and I missed the damn episode, even though I planned for it when we were talking about running backs. Talk to me a little bit about Ollie Gordon, right? Because obviously this year he had about half as good a year as he had last year, almost by the numbers completely, right? Last year, leading college football in rushing yards. I mean, he was phenomenal in 2023. And then this past year, just a little bit less explosive. We didn't see the same level of production. I mean, talk to me a little bit about Ollie Gordon and where you see his stock at right now.
I think the Senior Bowl in general helped him because he's a unique running back. You don't see running backs that tall and can move as well as he does. But I think we figured out, over the course of the Senior Bowl week that, he's not really an outside zone guy. I think he's more of a gap scheme, gets downhill, counter, power, things like that. And I think, that kind of helps crystallize sometimes that the Senior Bowl is like, all right, maybe you're just not having an offense cater to what does best. The thing with college teams is that they're more system related versus catering to their personnel. Offensive coaches, offensive coordinators, they run a system and they have to have their guys, work the system. Obviously, the best coaches adapt and change over the course of the year, but you look at Oklahoma State, they struggled this year. They didn't have a good offensive line, and they struggle run blocking. And sometimes as a running back, that kind of forces you to go home run searching a little bit. You saw it with. I'll use an NFL example. You see that with Saquon Barkley, and not to say Ollie Gordon and Saquon Barkley are the same caliber of back,
right?
But when you're not in a great situation around you, you feel like you have to make big plays. Sometimes you go big play hunting, and that causes you to not stick with maybe the run scheme plan, and then all of a sudden you're trying to make something out of nothing. So I think that's a little bit what we had this year with Ollie Gordon. Didn't have as good as a team. Their offensive line really struggled. He was a little banged up over the course of the season too. But again, that's where it gets a little dicey in the evaluation process. A guy that has a dominant 2023, but 2024 is up and down. Obviously, Deion Walker is someone we're going to talk about later in the show, but you got to still go through that process, and you can't ignore the 2024 tape, even though he has, some elite 2023 tape. And NFL teams care a little bit more about your most recent tape and not your best overall tape. And I think some people kind of forget that a little bit. Like, you'll know the names sometimes and know the players, that are the top names for a couple of years. But if they don't have as good of a season in 2024, that matters still. So I think you're looking at a guy maybe coming into a year that made sense in round two and maybe early round three. I think he's pushing round 3 or 4 right now. And I think the
Mm.
Senior Bowl helped him recoup a little bit of his stock. But at the end of the day, there's still going to be question marks about how can he be the same player he was, in 2023 when he goes to the NFL. So I think it certainly matters when a player doesn't perform up to expectations in the course of the season. And like I said, the game feel still matters. But you can always help yourself in the draft process by going out and looking good in a game setting like the Senior Bowl game. And really as a kind of the week went on, he got better because he got more snaps. The first day he only got I counted he only had 6 or 7 live reps because they had 5, 6 running backs that all needed to rotate in. So it's hard to stand out in those All-Star games as running backs, but the game reps, live game reps are always good. And I think with Ali Gordon, it's clear that the pass protection still needs to improve. He's not going to be an elite receiving running back, but he certainly showed that ability to run routes out of the backfield.
Yeah. I think of like a player like Derek Stingley Jr. in the past who had a phenomenal season the year prior, comes back to LSU, kind of falters, not very good. I mean, obviously there's some injury stuff there, but then he comes in and now he's playing with the Texans. Great, all pro level. So it's not that they cannot go back to what they were prior. It's just we don't see it a lot, and that's why we tend to weigh the 2024 tape or whatever year is more recently in the building of the profile. One thing I do want to mention though is like film is so heavily weighted for me, but I know that there's NFL teams that are super into the measurables and certain thresholds. Like if you're an offensive tackle, you don't have the 34-inch arms, they're not going to draft you. Talk about if you had any communication with scouts there that actually worked for an NFL team and what they're specifically looking for. I know that like in years past with Dan Quinn and the Seahawks there, they would always look for the lengthy corners that carried over to the Cowboys whenever he was DC here. So just speak a little bit about that stuff and how much that really does impact a player in their draft grade.
I think it matters specifically for linemen more than anything, that do you meet those thresholds, but also can you handle when you don't meet those thresholds? Can you handle being a tackle with sub 33-inch arms? Can you handle maybe being a center with subs 31-inch arms? So to me, it's all about getting to see them in person. And you'll see scouts like kind of whisper to each other. Sometimes they'll talk about a player, that they like coming in and they want to see how they perform. But these guys, they get the measurements already. They get the verified measurements, and they have it, from the previous spring. With the exception of like rising juniors. Like if there's rising seniors, coming back to the program, they'll do the measuring. They'll do their measurables that spring before their senior year, so they get a chance to see what they are already coming in at as they enter summer scouting and into the season. And obviously, they'll remeasure the day before Senior Bowl practices start. But I think for the most part, seeing these guys up close gives you a better view of what they can and can't do, what they can and can't handle, and how they overcome some of their deficiencies, quote unquote. If they don't have the exact measurables. I think, certainly the thresholds are always an important guide, and they give us a little bit more insight in the media and people that cover the draft to what they're looking for. But, they're not married to that all the time. I think sometimes it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. Is like, yeah, that matters, but at the end of the day, you still got to take a really good football player. Whether it's a tackle that's 34-inch arms or 33. Maybe it's a defensive back that doesn't have 32-inch arms. Like you're gonna find a place for good players regardless of their measurables. But it's certainly an important starting point for NFL teams. But if a guy falls in love with a guy, from their character, from their film, and what they
Yeah.
do, certainly the measurables play a part in it, but they're still going to take their guy. Maybe he doesn't go first round, but on day 2 or day 3, at that point the measurables kind of stick out the window. Sometimes you're taking guys for a couple of traits they have on the field versus some of the measurables they do have. So I think it matters when you're talking about first round caliber players, because you invest so much into that player, and obviously get the 5-year deal.
Mhm.
There's a lot of investment that goes into that. But after the first 32 picks, you see every year, maybe a guy that's consensus ranked 75th, he goes 35th, just
Mhm.
because the team really likes what he brings to the table. So I think for NFL teams, it's a different process. Some teams tend to stick with what they like to get. Like the Packers come to mind as
You
a
know,
team that are pretty stuck heavily on their thresholds. But I
definitely.
think the modern teams, really understand that yes, thresholds matter, but you also got to get guys that are reliable, and that can play right now, and not play in a few years.
Yeah, some of these guys that have gone to the Senior Bowl in the past, you think of like a Tank Dell, very small, but when he's on the field, he's not injured. He's a very good player, a very good slot receiver. He was one of my pet cats during that draft process. I've heard from like Brian Broaddus, a former scout. He's like, you can make exceptions, just don't make exceptions every time. Because then you'll get the outliers, and you'll get too many of those guys on the team, and you don't look concise. You get the band of misfits kind of a thing. And so if you have 10 other guys that are meeting your thresholds, but you have Ardarius Washington on the back end as the Baltimore Ravens, like he's a small safety, but that's your one exception. That's okay. Just don't make it, continue to make exceptions over and over, because then you're not really following your draft profile and your grades and how you gather your stuff, and then that's where you get lost, and you're not doing your due diligence, as they say. um, let's jump into our offensive risers really quick. Devin, I know that, I mean, maybe you don't know this, but I'm a big Oregon fan. I thought my guy Tez Johnson went absolutely crazy at the Senior Bowl. I watched the one-on-one reps, his release packages. Sometimes, they can get the too much at the line and whatnot, but I thought that he was very exceptional at just getting out on the breaks, and being concise in the catch point, being precise with his routes. Everything that he did, I thought rose his stock. And it, like I mentioned earlier, Tank Dell, he's a guy that was, kind of that outlier. Now he's paved a way for maybe a Tez Johnson to come in here and kind of rise up these boards because he fits that kind of profile. Talk about Tez Johnson really quick, and what you saw from him.
Yeah, I think whenever you get guys that weigh in, I think he weighed in like 156 or 159 pounds. Like, people always raise an eyebrow, but I think the biggest thing is can you create separation, and can you do it quickly? And I think he checks both of those boxes. Obviously, you saw that in his college film at Oregon, but in those one-on-one settings, no one really defended him that well. And obviously, I kind of talked about this earlier as a caveat, like the one-on-ones between wide receivers and DBs, is designed for the receivers to win. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, you're still evaluating, like, all right, what are you doing at the line of scrimmage to combat maybe, and they're not like doing a full on press,
Mm-hmm.
full man press at the line of scrimmage, but they are, close enough to where it might be needed. And he did a good job in mixing up the way that he releases, whether it's a speed release, diamond release, uh, just finding ways to create that subtle separation at the line of scrimmage matters, especially for a guy his size that's
Mm-hmm.
probably going to be a big time slot player. But someone that didn't go to the Senior Bowl last year, but still got drafted first round was Xavier Worthy, and had a lot of the same questions that Tez Johnson has coming out, and we see what he's been able to do with the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think you know Tez Johnson certainly has a path to be successful at the NFL level, and I think it's going to take a creative offensive coordinator that understands and utilizes his skill sets to the best of his ability. But I think overall he had a really good week, and he showed exactly what you were expecting to show from Tej Johnson. That he's a really fast, electric player that can really run good routes and is reliable at the catch point.
Yeah, I really like the Rams fit for Tez Johnson, in my opinion. Just playing him in the slot, Puka can move in and out, and then Jordan Whittington. Obviously, they're shopping Coop around. But Mike, who is somebody that stood out to you?
So I want to get your thoughts because I talked a lot about him a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about wide receivers, and he's one of my favorite receivers in the draft. But I Io Manor is one of my favorite wideouts in the entire draft. I love his frame. I love his ability to go get the football. So talk to me a little bit about him. Am I a little too bullish on him? Because I understand that the speed is not crazy, and I understand that speed is a big thing when it comes to receivers, especially modern day wide receivers. Tell me a little bit about Io Manor and if I'm being a little too bullish on him.
Yeah, I certainly would have loved to see him down at the Senior Bowl. Obviously,
Yep.
he did not participate, but I
Right.
think he's kind of the modern fit for a wide receiver. You for a guy that I think his separation ability is a little bit underrated. Compared to what people think of him as more of a physical contested catch guy. But I think when you have that skill set as a durable player that can play in the boundary, that can win those one-on-one routes down the field, is certainly going to be a guy that has value at the NFL level. Again, would have loved to see him at the Senior Bowl, just see how he faces off against different types of corners and
Mhm.
physical versus the smaller, speedier guys. But I think overall, he's a guy that you got to be pretty confident in his projection because I think he makes sense as a day two receiver, assuming that he tests well at the combine
Yeah.
and everything goes well for him throughout the process. But I think for him, he's going to be a candidate to be a guy that can come in and make an immediate contribution. Obviously, he burst on the scene a few years ago when he had that really big game against Colorado and Stanford's crazy comeback victory. But he's continued to elevate that, and I think he's a guy that's durable, strong hands, can play in the boundary, can live on the outside, which I think will be huge for his projection. I don't really see him as a slot guy, but I think he's a outside receiver, and in a class that has a lot of potential slot receivers. I think he could go a little bit higher than we expected because of his versatility to play outside.
Yeah, there's another guy I kind of want to talk about too, and that's Jack Beck, right? So he ended up winning MVP at the Senior Bowl, and that's obviously like a bit, this part in the process is a pretty big deal. Like is he this year's Cooper Cup? Is he this year's Ricky Pearsall? Like is he one of those guys that you can see kind of skyrocket? I shouldn't say skyrocket's a strong word, but elevate his stock to a point where you can see him go. I'll put it
Second round.
significantly higher than what we had in the pre-draft process, maybe.
Honestly, I think he's already risen his stock. I think he's a guy that, coming in, we knew he was a durable, hand-up receiver that, could run routes on the outside in the slot. And he continued to prove that at the Senior Bowl at a high level. I mean, even in the game, you saw him make a couple of difficult catches over the middle of the field. And teams are always looking for that durable guy that can catch balls over the middle of the field, that can move the chains, that's a willing blocker. So he's going to be a perfect fit. And I said this last year about Ricky Pearsall, but he's going to be a perfect fit in the Shanahan and McVay type offenses because he's a willing blocker. They are very creative in the way that they get their pass catchers open. And he thrives in running routes over the middle of the field and creating plays with the ball in his hands. I also think it helps that he started his career at tight end at LSU, which I think doesn't get talked about a ton. And he got that experience running routes over the middle of the field, running routes against safeties and linebackers. And you see him translate, as he's moved outside and play in the slot. But yeah, I think he's a guy that kind of fits that mold of, all right, you saw what Cooper Cup did, you saw what Ricky Pearsall did last year. And I don't think he's typed the quite the athlete like a Pearsall is. And even Pearsall surprised me with how fast he was and explosive he was at the combine. But Just overall, I think Besh has done huge wonders for his stock already, and he's firmly on day two for me.
My one of my biggest pet cats is Jalen Royals. Uh, Speak on him and how you kind of feel he rose his stock, or if he kind of stayed about the same as where you had him.
Yeah, he was in the third, fourth round area for me. And I feel like overall he's been kind of in that same area, leaving out of it. Like
Mhm.
I think he's still a slot only guy, and I think he was still like early in the week still feeling those effects of his season ending injury he had
Mhm.
that prematurely ended his season at Utah State. So you could see there was still he wasn't quite trusting his planting foot as much as you would like to see. But over the course of the week, I thought he got more comfortable and showed we can be as a dynamic route runner of the slot. The hard thing is that if it's a slot only guy, it kind of caps how high you can go in the draft.
Yeah.
Just because you don't bring a ton of versatility to the offense. So I think he's still a slot receiver, which I think is in that third, fourth round area. But certainly if he goes and runs like a 4.25 40, that kind of changes the math on things a little bit, but I think with the receivers, can you do more than just the one thing?
Yeah.
Obviously he's a great deep threat, a great player with the ball in his hands. But are you going to be able to consistently win down the field? On the outside, I don't think he's that type of player, but I still think there's value for him. And I think the sweet spot for him is round three.
Mm. I
Is
thought that he could play some Z, but he's my pet guy. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious about um, because going into the process, right, especially at the stage we're at now, I think the consensus is okay. We've got two legit first round quarterbacks that are pretty much going to go first round almost no matter what happens, right? Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders are going to go in
Hmm.
the first round at some point, likely early. We're kind of looking for that third quarterback, right? Because you've got, and especially in this sort of
Hmm.
draft scenario where you've got Tennessee, you've got Cleveland, you've got the Giants, all in need of quarterbacks at the top three in the draft. Realistically, there's only two that we see right now that could be viable for those two positions. Did the Senior Bowl change that? Was there anybody that stood out where you could make the argument of maybe not even going as high as obviously top three, top five, but somebody that could sneak in either, mid late first round, maybe even early second round, where you can say, okay, you can feel confident in taking a guy if you're a team that needs a quarterback.
I don't feel confident, to put it shortly.
There you go.
If this is a draft that you need a quarterback, it's a tough one to pick after the first two guys are gone. So to me, it's really about, all right, what is the trajectory of your team? Are you in a scenario that you want to compete within the next year or two?
Mm.
You probably take a more NFL ready guy like Will Howard or Kyle McCord. And again, I don't know if I would take either of those guys back into the first round. This is talking day two. Um, but if you are willing to gamble and you see maybe this guy in 2 years and maybe 3 years, I think Jalen Milroe's still in that bucket of like
Mm.
someone's going to take a chance on him, right? And you just don't know when that is going to be. And I think it has to do a lot with the physical tools, the dual threat running ability. I've seen Jackson Dart and some of the things that people have been saying about him. I don't think I'm quite there with him either. He's firmly a day two guy for me too,
Mm.
just because like it is. There's a lot of intriguing things with him, in a couple years starter, and he looked much better at the end of the week versus the beginning of the week. But the offensive the offensive system change from running an Ole Miss offense that doesn't really translate much to the NFL
Hmm.
level to running an NFL level style offense, I think it's still going to take him a year or two to adjust as well. So, like I said, long story short, you probably don't want to be drafting a quarterback. I think like a guy like Tyler Shuck from Louisville really helped his stock just because he looked like the most consistent quarterback at the Senior Bowl. But yeah, it's a gamble either way. The third quarterback is going to be the most interesting one that comes off the board, because who is it going to be?
Yeah.
And how late will it be?
Well,
I don't think there's a third quarterback worth taking in the first round of this draft. But if someone did, and someone is looking for a heavily traits guy, I can see Jalen Milroe being the guy.
Mhm.
is that your third guy, Milroe?
Um, Honestly, I haven't even really done a deep dive into the quarterbacks, just because,
Yeah.
like, for me, it's firmly, like Shador and Cam 1 and 2. But like
Hmm.
after that, it just becomes interesting. Personally for
Quarterbacks is
me,
like
like,
the last one I watch.
yeah, like personally for me, like if I had to pick today, I would say it would be the third quarterback I would prefer is probably Shuck or McCord. But
Mm.
again, that's not saying a ton in this class, right? And Jalen Milroe probably factors in it, because I still really like Milroe, but it's hard. Again, we talked about this earlier. The tape from this year did not really, improve after the Georgia game. After the Georgia game, everything kind of went south for him, and he kind of reverted to some of the things he struggled with last year. So it's like, again, it's a dicey, year to evaluate quarterbacks, because how confident do you feel? And like a guy like Will Howard, obviously is getting a lot of buzz for, especially off his college football playoff run. I still think he's probably a round 3, round 4 guy, just because I think the arm is a little capped, and I think he still has some strides to make as a quarterback to kind of get to that next level, starter level.
Hmm.
But he's looked good down the stretch, and he's done some great things for his stock, taking Ohio State to a national championship. So I think you're really going to start to see some division probably around the time that the quarterbacks throw at the combine, because then it's going to be about, all right, who do you trust more to develop, you know, and
Mm.
and turning
You know,
into a potential starter.
seeing these guys like Brock Purdy, Bo Nix, that have had like so much playing time in college, who is that guy that we're lower on, who's played a lot of college ball, and if he is asked to step in there, can do it and play pretty well? Who is that guy, would you say?
I would probably lean McCord or Tyler Shuck, just because they played a lot, and for especially for McCord, playing at Ohio State and playing at Syracuse. I mean, that's a lot of starts, a lot of different experiences. Even though he's only been a 2-year starter, um, he's had to take a large jump as a guy that was just a backup his first couple of years to, all right, you're the guy at Ohio State, and there's a lot of pressure that comes with it. And then you go to Syracuse, where maybe the talent isn't the same as Ohio State, but you find a way to elevate that talent. So I think this year Syracuse has certainly helped him. And then Tyler Shuck, he's played a lot of football. From I think he played early in his career at Texas Tech, and obviously played I think he started his career at Oregon, then Texas Tech, and then obviously this recent year at Louisville. I mean, talking through it now, I'd probably say Tyler Shuck is probably that guy that he's played a lot of football. Um, he has a lot of experience. Uh, so my ranking in that will be Shuck, McCord, and then Howard, because Howard was a couple years starter at Kansas State before taking over Ohio State this year.
Mhm.
So those would be my 3 guys that have played a lot of football, and you know you might feel comfortable with them being a spot starter.
Let's talk about Mike Green, right? So led the nation this year, 17 sacks. I mean, from what I've seen, he's one of the biggest risers as far as overall draft position that you see. I mean, talk to me a little bit about Mike Green. Is he a lock top 20 at this point? What are we looking at?
I think so, and I don't think it's top 10 area. I don't think he's gonna quite get there, because I don't think the measurables are gonna the measure up to a
The
potential
win.
top 10 pick, but
Hmm.
I can see him certainly going in the top 20. Yeah, the week was big for him, and I think a lot of people had questions about his run defense coming in. Even though I thought he was pretty solid in that department coming in, he just isn't going to be, some monster game wrecker as a run stopper. but he certainly can shoot gaps, and he plays much bigger than his frame. He came in at 251, and a guy that um, looked a little bit lighter on film. He looked around 230, 240. But I think he showed the ability. Obviously, we know his pass rushing ability, the power behind his hands, and what he's able to do. But at the Senior Bowl, he was able to. Yeah, I just saw that comment. So that just shows how old Tyler Shuck is. But yeah, back to Mike Green. I mean, he's a fantastic player, fantastic prospect. And he's a guy that I liked in the summer last year is more as a rotational guy. He obviously took on more of a starter's role and became a star for Marshall. But I think when you go down to the Senior Bowl and you get wins against some of the best tackles, maybe in a class, obviously that rep that he knocked over Josh Carnley is shown a lot, but he also made some plays during team that have you encouraged in what he can be in handling some of the NFL some of the handling some of the NFL level tackles and matching up against some of the power that might be presented to him. And you saw from day one to day two, day one he didn't have as strong a day, but day two he really popped off the screen and had counters and was a little bit more physical with his hands. So you're seeing a guy that takes coaching well, that really understands what he's good at as a speed rusher and knowing how to use it against opposing offensive linemen.
Who do you like as a fit for him?
I think the Buccaneers make a lot of sense. Atlanta Falcons also come to mind. I think the NFC South in general needs key edge rushers. I mean, every single team I think could use an edge rusher this year from NFC South.
Yep.
So I can't see him getting past the Bucks, inside the top 20, just because they need edge rusher. He's a really good player. And if he makes it outside the top 20, I could see a team trading up for him. I see, Brian said the Eagles. I mean, they need an edge rusher too. Brandon Graham is looking like he's going to retire. Josh Sweat's going to hit free agency. Bryce Huff hasn't been great this year for the Eagles, so he's certainly not getting out of the first round. Just a matter of, all right, is he going inside the top 20 or not? I think he does. I think he's going to test elite, and I think a team doesn't want to miss out on what he can bring to NFL squad.
Yeah. It seemed like, gosh, why am I blanking on him? Kid out of Georgia, I completely blanked, that the Eagles took. He kind of popped off.
Nolan
recently.
Smith. Nolan
Smith. Thank you. Nolan Smith popped off. I don't know. I've been hearing a lot about Walter Nolan and his potential fit with the Eagles, but just another Senior Bowl guy that really rose his stock. It seems like one of those guys that's a little bit lighter, and people say that that can kind of hold him back. Obviously, not meeting the measurables, but he looks strong in the practices to me. He was getting penetration, and I thought he was a guy that's definitely solidified himself as a 20 to 40 pick.
Yeah, I think that's a good range for him, just because with defensive tackles that may be a little bit undersized, like you kind of have to decide, all right, what is their calling card? What is something that makes them unique? What can they do at the NFL level if they're not going to be, this 300-pound guy that's a run stopper or, clogs up the running lanes. Mm-hmm. So, obviously Byron Murphy, he went in the 20s last year, and, I think they're about the same. Yeah, Kalijah Cansey, a couple years ago out of Pitt, he went inside the top 20. So I think the top 20 is a little rich for Nolan, just because, like, yes, he is.
Too. This is a deep defensive tackle draft.
Yeah. It's a really deep defensive tackle, but also, what is the prototype of guy you are looking for? Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure he's going to test as elite as Byron Murphy did last year, and I think that's a big reason he went top 20. Because he was a guy that most people thought, all right, maybe end of the first round, early second round, but then he tested elite. at the combine, and you saw what happened. Same thing with Kalijah Cansey. A lot of people were all over the map with him, and he goes inside of the top 20. So it's like, will Nolan be as elite of an athlete as those guys? I don't think so. I think he's certainly as explosive as those guys are, not only on tape but in person and practice. But I think he's also a guy that you know we're gonna see. Because like, I mean, the hard part is like, I like him as a player, I like him as a prospect, but I think with Nolan, and he even told me this point blank, that teams are questioning, how much does he love football? How much does he, uh, see himself at the NFL level being an elite player? And it's tough when you have that information, because like like you don't want that to be a part of it, but it's realistic. Like,
Yeah.
you know, so for me, it's kind of a tough balance. That's why I said 24 is a good range for him, because assuming that the character check out, teams feel confident about him and his ability, and he tests like an elite athlete, he should go inside the top 20.
Yeah.
But is that all going to check out? And to me, I don't know if it will. So I think he's a player that you get in
All
the
it takes is
building,
one
and
team.
yeah, and he's going to be a good NFL player. But again, this is the hard part of the evaluation process, is sometimes you don't know those things going in. You can only do it off of tape, and,
Yeah.
and do it off of, maybe what you hear, or what you see. So,
Mm.
yeah, so that's kind of the my kind of synopsis of Walter Nolan, a guy that's a really good player, elite production this year at Ole Miss, guy that just consistently showed up in every single game. Can two gap, can rush the passer at elite level. But again, I think it's going to come down to team fit, and does he check all the boxes for teams?
Yeah, that was one of the things that I heard the Senior Bowl did differently this year, is get the small talk stuff already for these guys in an interview video, so the NFL teams can come in and get right to the nitty gritty, which I really liked hearing about. But who's a defensive tackle that we are too low on? You think about Braden Fisk last year. I was very high on Braden Fisk. I just loved his film. He was a guy who played with his hair on fire, always looking to make plays. Sometimes they don't wrap up the best in the open field, but he's translated really well to the NFL this past season with the Rams. Who is the defensive tackle we're too low on, consensusly?
Darius Alexander from Toledo comes to mind. And
Mm,
again, it's another MAC player, and it feels like every year we have a guy that from the MAC that is making a name for itself at the Senior Bowl. But Darius Alexander did that, and I think the big thing that stood out for him is that he didn't shut it down after a really good first 2 days. He stayed for the third day of practice. He played in the game. So I think that's really going to endear NFL teams. Like, hey, this is a guy that's not from a Power 4 school, that just wants to continue to get better every day. And you saw him improve over the week. As a guy that all right, you coming in, you knew he was a big athletic guy that you know made some eye popping plays. I think everyone saw his pick six against Pitt and in their bowl game over bowl season. But he showed his ability to rush the passer, to defend the run, to make some really good plays. So he's the first one that comes to mind. And then two, Peebles from Virginia Tech, Anenas Peebles, who just was a terrific run stopper at the Senior Bowl. He did it in team, he did it in the game. He is kind of I would say kind of like a bowling ball type player, where he's hard to move. He just sticks in the middle of double teams. He can beat guys across the face and get into the backfield. And he was consistent. He did that on his film. He did it at the Senior Bowl. So he's a guy that's probably not going to go, in the top 2 rounds, maybe in the top 3 rounds, but a guy that if you need a run stopper, you need a guy that maybe is a 2 down player early in his career. He's a guy that I think fits that mold, and Again, a bit undersized, but a guy that's hard to move and can really knife in the backfield and get some defensive stops.
What round projection do you have him at?
Right now, fourth round, fourth to fifth round. I think that him being a little undersized and he has
Cowboys
some
don't have a
value as a
fourth
pass
rounder,
rusher.
so
Yeah, I think
need
he's a
run
guy that
stoppers, man.
yeah, he's a good run stopper for sure. And I think he's he doesn't have as deep of a pass rush back as some of the guys that are going to go ahead of him, but he certainly knows this role and he plays it well.
I feel like in the edge class in particular, right? And as far as the full defensive line, right? I think you can get a lot of value in the mid to later rounds as far as defensive tackles are concerned. But I also feel that way about the edge class as well. Guys like Landon Jackson, Kyle Kennard, Jared Ivey, those guys that you can have kind of second, third round. I think you can find some real value there. Talk about some of those guys. Who's one of the guys that stuck out for you as far as the edge class is concerned?
Yeah, edge class was probably, I would say, one of the better ones, if not the best class down there. Just because there's so many different type of guys. Obviously, you think about Shamar Stewart and Mike Green, the weeks that they had through 2 days of practice. Jared Ivey made some nice plays as you're thinking back over the week. But I think for me, I kind of go down, the list and like who was a really good player, who really stood out. And to me, it was the Texas defensive end, blanking on his
Barron
first
Sorrell.
name. Yeah, Barron Sorrell from Texas. That to me really stood out. His film he was always a disruptive player on film. Maybe he didn't always finish plays, and he was always near plays and making plays in the backfield. But you didn't quite see, anything that really necessarily sticks out in terms of maybe elite bend or elite first step. But he just is a reliable player down to down. He can win as a pass rusher in a couple different ways. He's a really, really good run defender. It felt like every time that he was in team, he was making a play on running downs. And I think the one-on-ones against offensive linemen, between the offensive and defensive linemen, you saw Sorrell winning quite a bit. He had a nice battle with Emory Jones, the LSU tackle, on the good on good sessions at I think the end of the second or third day of practice. And he just continued to, even when he was getting stopped, he was pushing guys backward and showed some of that power and strength. So I think he's a guy that's going to be more of the heavy set defensive end, that a guy that makes sense in a 4-3 system, can be a run stopper from that defensive end position, and can bring you some juice on passing down. So I would say Barron Sorrell is a guy that really stuck out to me as a guy that really helped himself at the Senior Bowl.
No.
How did you like Jordan Birch? Because he's a guy that, as an Oregon fan, I watch him transfer. Where did he come from? South Carolina, I believe, in the past. But he's a guy that can kick inside and play some 3-tech if you need him to. Talk about his versatility. Was he going up against guards, tackles? What was he doing, and what did he look like?
Yeah, let's see. You said Jordan Birch, right?
Yes.
He actually did not end up participating, unfortunately.
He did.
He was like a
was
late
injured,
pullout. Like I think he was injured or
I know he
something
got
that went
injured
on.
during the season, but I didn't know if that held him out of the game.
Yeah, so he ended up not playing because I did a quick search because I was like, wait a minute, like he was supposed to be there, and I don't remember ever talking about him or seeing him. But yeah, so
I
he
didn't see
pulled out
anything
like
on
the
him,
day
so-
before. Yeah, he pulled out the day before they were slated to head down there, and so yeah, unfortunately, he did not get to see him. But I can talk about another Oregon guy and Josh Connerly. I thought he had a really good week, despite the rep against Mike Green.
Yeah.
I think he still had a really good week. He had a really good day one, and maybe day two and day three were a little up and down. But certainly I think he's a guy that you feel good about as a potential developmental tackle. Maybe you take him at the end of round one and kind of help mold him into your starting left tackle. But he showed some ability I still think his core strength and anchor needs to improve a little bit. And obviously, we saw with the Rebel Mike Green,
Mm-hmm.
um, but he's still a really good player that I think helped himself by going there and showing that he can stick out at tackle. Because there was some discussion, maybe he moves in the interior, but I think he's firmly a tackle.
Did he like just put himself on the map as the best tackle there, or did you feel like somebody was better? Because I know that the other two top tackles in this class didn't want to participate, and he actually did come and participated. So did he look like the best tackle there? Did he sell himself as that, fringe first round kind of a guy, or was there another guy that impressed you more?
At tackle, I think he was probably the best true tackle there. It just kind of hard because, like, all right, like Emory Jones, he's a right tackle, but he probably
Mm-hmm.
goes in the guard. Jonas Savanea from Arizona, probably same thing. And both those guys struggled at tackle a little bit this week.
Mm.
So I think he was certainly the best tackle there. As it relates to the draft class, I think it really depends on, you know, are you going to play tackle or guard? And I think that's a big discussion around Kelvin Banks and Will Campbell,
Yep.
obviously the top two guys. Ahmad Mimbu from Missouri, the right tackle from Missouri, was supposed to participate, but he had an illness that kept him out. So to me, it probably would have been between Mimbu and Connerly as who's the best tackle there at the Senior Bowl. But I think Connerly showed that they can handle being a tackle at the NFL level and can hang with some of those different body types. So I think the larger discussion if he's the best tackle in the class. I don't think I'm quite there with him because I still think Will Campbell's a tackle, but again, I
Do you have
think
Banks is
you know
moving into guard?
I have both of them still sticking at tackle.
Okay.
I don't think moving either of them to guard helps or hurts their projection necessarily, but I still think
Mhm.
both of them make sense at tackle, at least for me. But I get Will
That's
Campbell's probably the most likely to move to guard because of his, sub 33-inch arms.
yeah.
But yeah, I think overall, Connerly certainly in that discussion, but I think teams are probably going to go more like, all right, who's just the best offensive lineman, that we can take, and I think he's probably in that 4 or 5 area. Will be
Yeah,
my guess.
those two are definitely going to be one of those guys where I'm perking my ears up to hear how they're introduced as a guard or a tackle whenever they are drafted. Same with um, Travis Hunter as well. Is he going to be a receiver or a corner? Depending on when he gets drafted, at what they're going to announce him at. Mike, any more
It's
questions?
got to be corner, right, for Travis Hunter, Devin.
I feel it.
I
At
would
least
think
that's how I
so.
feel, right?
Yeah, I would think so because it's easier to get him plays and packages on offense than versus defense. So
Yeah.
Josh
yeah,
Simmons
I forgot completely
injured.
forgot about Josh Simmons, obviously because he's injured.
If
But
he
he's in
wasn't
that
injured, would
discussion.
he be offensive tackle one, like solidified?
I think he would certainly have a strong case.
Yeah.
It's hard to say because like he took such a big leap from last year's film to this year's. Um, but he missed some of their big games this year,
Yeah.
which is hard, because like the way that he was, I will say the way that he was, his trajectory. I mean, even the first quarter of the Oregon game, he was looking really really good, but
Hmm.
again, it's hard to say, and it really depends on how soon he's going to be ready to play next season, because we haven't heard much about his injury and what it is and the severity of it. So. Um, that one's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, I look at um another positional group that I just see like a lot of NFL starters, right? And that's safety, right? Like I feel like that's a pretty strong, like outside of Malachi Stark, so I think he's going to be the number one safety. I think he's the consensus number one safety. But like you're looking at guys like Lathan Ransom and Billy Bowman and Malachi Moore and Andrew Makuba and like I just feel like there's a lot of starting NFL safeties in that group. I know a lot of these questions kind of kind of circle around each other and are a little bit similar, but who sticks out? who's the guy that you like? Who's the guy that stuck out to you?
Yeah, Andrew Makuba from Texas is probably the guy that sticks out to me, um, just because he's
Playmaker.
always around the football.
Yeah,
He's a
Hmm.
playmaker.
I love him.
Um, he just plays football at such a elite level, and it's just the instincts, being always near the football, being able to make plays on the back end, and be able to come down and make plays. Maxon Hook is a really good player
Yeah.
too. That I think had a solid
I'm
week at
starting
the
to think
Senior
we need to
Bowl,
get
but
Brian on the next episode.
yeah,
He's breaking down
yeah,
these
yeah.
guys, man.
He would definitely be a great guy. I've worked with him, so he's a great guy. I would definitely recommend him. But back to Makuba, yeah, he's such an elite player. A guy that really, I think, solidify his stock as a guy that should go in the top 100. That should be drafted. On day 2 of the draft, and can really upgrade a secondary.
Yeah.
I think Malachi starts. He's kind of gonna have that, probably the Derek Stingley treatment, where everyone's like, all right, you didn't play as well in 2024 as some of your previous years, are you still that caliber of player? So I think, that's what kind of like a guy like Andrew McCoupa, he's not gonna get drafted before Malachi Starks, but I think he's made a strong statement, and I can
Right.
see him being in fact impactful guy from day one.
Absolutely. Is there anybody you want to circle back around that we hadn't mentioned earlier, whether it be from the running back group or one of those guards or a small school guy that really proved that he could play with these bigger school guys? Is there anybody like that?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to Grace Abel, the offensive lineman from North
There
Dakota
you go.
State. A lot of people were obviously talking about him coming out of the Senior Bowl, but I think what's impressive with him is that wherever position they put him at, he excelled at. Obviously he's going to be interior offensive lineman. He might be a guy that you end up, um, he might end up being the center at the NFL level. But
Mhm.
I think he's proven that he can play not only at a high level, but be a really reliable interior offensive lineman. So whether you put him at guard, if you put him at center, I know he played tackle at North Dakota State. I think you're getting a guy that's going to be dependable, that can handle all types of defensive linemen, whether it's quick twitch guys or more powerful guys. And he anchors really, really well and replaces his hands really, really well. So he's probably the biggest riser out of everyone at the Senior Bowl, just because we was able to do. But I also give a shout out to Jackson Slater, the guard from Sacramento State, that had a really good week too. I think those two guys, being small school guys, those two and Darius Alexander, I think, did a lot for their stocks as guys that aren't from Power Four schools that a lot of people didn't know a lot about coming into the week, but certainly leaving the week, they were the talk.
Yeah, and Cody Mock, the last North Dakota State inside guy who's been pretty good for the Bucks. But yeah, I haven't heard a lot about Slater. I listen to a lot of Cowboys content and stuff like that, so I'm familiar with what Brian Broaddus says about these small school guys. They got to walk on water if you're gonna take a chance with them with a premium draft pick. Do you feel like these guys are top 100 guys, or where are you putting them at?
I mean, Gray's Abel might be pushing top 50, after
Yeah.
what he did.
Yeah.
I think Slater is probably more in that 100 to 125 range, because I do think his arms are a little bit shorter than you would like for NFL offensive lineman, uh,
Mhm.
regardless of being a guard or tackle. But I think Zabel certainly in that top 50 conversation.
Mm.
Yep.
Mike, do you have any
Listen,
more?
I'm good with risers, but um, I do think it's interesting that we when I asked you the question about quarterbacks, when I asked you the question about is there any possibility that there's that third guy that can come out after Cam or Shaduri? You're just like, no, I don't think so. It's not the year for QBs, man. I mean, let me ask you this. I know you said you haven't done a deep dive, but who do you like more, Cam or Shadur?
I probably lean Shador a little bit,
Hmm.
because I think he's a really good processor. And I think, there's certainly concerns about, all right, he's not a guy that's going to make a lot of plays out of side structure. He's not going to be, he's a guy that needs to kind of speed up his time in the pocket a little bit, because I think
Yep.
he was one of the guys that held the ball one of the longest in college football. Um, but I think when you see him he gets it, in terms of anticipation, in terms of like, all right, I've taken a couple sacks here. All right, I need to get the ball out a little bit quicker. So I think he's a little bit better in terms of like in-game adjustments and understanding and being able to read defenses. I think with Cam Ward, you're going to get a guy that's going to make a lot of off-script plays. That's going to do a lot of exciting things. But he's also a guy that's going to do a lot of head-scratching things as well. You're going to live on a fine line with Cam Ward and what he's able to do. So I like Cam Ward as a prospect. I think he's a guy that has done tremendous for his story, for his career. But I think he's a guy that still needs a little bit more development in terms of like, all right, understanding like when to take the check down, when to take the play that's in front of you, and mixing that with some of his off script playmaking, and you play up to his strengths. He's I would call him a dual threat guy, but I wouldn't call him necessarily, maybe a Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson caliber type of runner. He runs
Mhm.
out of necessity. He doesn't run because he wants to, right?
Right.
So I think that's where he has an edge on Shador, but I think Shador is the more NFL ready passer right now. And certainly Cam Ward can get there, and I think a coach is going to have to coach him up a little bit more on when to take the plays that are in front of him, when to take those chances. But I think those guys, they're going to command different things, so it's really about how you build around their strengths. And I think for Shador, it's going to be about having both guys are going to need to have a good offensive line, but I think Cam Ward can get himself out of trouble a little bit more than Shador. But I like what Shador brings more as a passer and processor, and the way that he commands an offense.
I kind of have Shadur as like a Tua kind of a comp for me. Just with it, he doesn't have the biggest arm, but he has good touch. He has that ability to read and make the right throws, but not the most mobile quarterback either. And obviously, Tua has the concussion, so he can't really be that. But yeah, that's kind of my comp for him. Um, Anybody else that we're missing, or anybody that you want to talk about as kind of a faller or somebody that really hurt their stock?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it earlier, but I don't think Deion Walker did anything for himself to help
Mm,
his stock.
yeah.
Like you knew that he was a big guy, that he could be disruptive, and he certainly showed flashes of that. But I think his Senior Bowl week was more of a reflection of what you saw on tape. A guy that at times he's a really good player that you could see being he has some dominant flashes at the
Yeah.
college level, but is it going to be consistent down to down? I don't think he provided enough evidence that he can be that player. So it's his evaluation is going to be tough because he's not going to test well. He's a bigger guy. Like what is his role at the NFL level? I don't think he knows what his role is quite yet. Are you going to be a run stopper? Are you a pass rush type of player? Um, so I think that is kind of hurting himself in this process. Is you see what Mason Graham is doing, and Kenneth Grant. Talked about Darius Alexander earlier. Those guys understand what they are, and they bring it on a down to down basis. I think Walker just isn't quite there. I would say in terms of what you were expecting coming into the week, and
Yeah.
in him leaving early. I thought he should have at least stayed through the game to get those live game reps. I think it was not a great decision for him to pull out early.
Yeah, the best moment of the week for him is when his measurables came in and people saw how massive he really was. Um, he ki Man, I won't say I'm completely out on him because you watch the film and you get those flashes of what he could be. But it seems like he takes plays off. It seems like he's not always totally invested in being that play record that he has the potential to be, whether it be in conditioning, whether it be motivation, whatever it is. You got to figure out if you can pull that out from him. And that's where the interview process is so important. So we're going to see at the combine, medicals is a huge thing, but also those interviews. And that's really going to determine where he gets slotted in this draft. Because, like I
Yep.
said earlier, it only takes the one team. Um, Anybody else that you thought just really hurt their stock, whether it be them just dropping out early or just bad play?
Nothing else really comes to mind, or anybody else comes to mind. I think, you kind of just say it with a grain of salt. I mean, you could say the quarterbacks, really outside Tyler
Hmm.
Shuck, but yeah, I mean, no one was really that glaringly like, all right, I don't think you match here with some of your film. A lot of guys
Hmm.
checked out in terms of like their film. Maybe they were inconsistent on film, had inconsistent weeks on at the Senior Bowl, and maybe guys that you were expecting to be good were good. So to me, I don't think anyone necessarily stood out. Super negatively. I will say like Princely Umani Mellon probably had an up and down week. And I was expecting him to be a little bit
Edge
better
rusher
in
from Ole
terms of
Miss, correct?
yeah, I was expecting him to be a little bit better than he was, in the week. But
Hmm.
again, like he's more of a designated pass rusher type, so I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting anything like crazy from him. But I was expecting him to win a little bit more,
Yeah.
in those
And yeah, and
one-on-one
you watch
settings.
like if you look at his film, there's times where he's not even on the field until third down, like you mentioned, designated. Um, do you think that that hurts him? Where would you see him factoring into a team? It like, of course, you want those headhunter guys, but you also want guys that can, set the edge and at least play the run and be a pivotal part of your defense moving forward. Where do you take those guys that are just one trick ponies?
Yeah, though I think it starts probably end of round two, early round three, and then from there on, just really
Hmm.
depends on how well they test. You try not to, I know teams try not to take one trick ponies in the first round, but sometimes it makes sense if you're a team that's one piece away from the Super Bowl. You add a guy that's a DPR. Like it makes sense. So I think it really
Yeah.
it depends on the team. But I think generally speaking, like round three is kind of the sweet spot for those guys because you know what you're getting out of them. You
Yeah.
you don't need to question what you're getting out of them, but it's if they can do more, if you put more on their plate.
Yeah, it seemed like those quarterbacks were up and down depending upon the day. Um, I want you, it doesn't have to be a Senior Bowl guy. I want you to stamp your flag on a guy that is a day two or later draft pick that you say is going to be, he's going to be a hell of an NFL player. So you can come back, circle back around, screen record this video, throw it up on your TikTok and say, look, I'm Devin Jackson and I was right about this guy. Who is it?
This one is a tough one because I feel like there are a couple guys for me that kind of fit
Shout
that.
him out.
But I'll just pick one here. I'm gonna go with Kanata Mumpfield, the receiver from Pitt. I believe in his route running ability. I think he's a guy that maybe he plays slot, maybe he plays some boundary. But I think he's getting undervalued a little bit in this receiver class. Yeah, I think he's a
Hadn't even
guy
heard of
that
him.
yeah, I think he's a guy that's probably going to go day three. Probably a guy that maybe you hear fit sixth round, but I think he's ready made for the NFL. I think he's a little bit on the lighter side, like 170, 180, but just reliable. Can win as an inside receiver, can win as an outside receiver, and I can see him,
Ooh.
making an instant impact at the NFL level just because he played on some pit teams that was in a high volume passing offense. He started his career at Akron, and again, he burst on the scene as a freshman at Akron, but he wasn't playing. He was surrounded by a ton of great players. But yeah, so I would say Mumfield is a guy for me.
Mm. So that's the Antonio Brown of this draft class right here.
I don't know about Antonio Brown, but maybe a guy that surprises some people
Just
with how
later draft
quickly.
round, draft pick, starts out special teams, and then eventually fruitions into a starter, at least, is what you're hoping for.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, any more questions for Devin?
I for the most part, I'm okay. I'm just, I'll close out with this, right? Because we really haven't talked about any tight ends, to be honest with you. And I don't know. Every year, even when my team doesn't need a tight end, I just love looking at tight ends just because they're a fascinating study for me. Harold Fannin Jr., right? Bowling Green. He's like from everything that I see and everything that I've read and everything like that, this guy's a physical freak at the tight end position. Um, but it seemed like people were wanting a little bit more out of him come the Senior Bowl. Is that something that you sensed as well?
Yeah, I think people were expecting a little bit more separating ability,
Mm-hmm.
even though I don't think he was like necessarily like a big separator on his film. You know, he's just a guy that is a really good rack, yards after catch guy and physical, a willing blocker. And you saw a lot of those things, but again, another guy that you won't see those things until you get into a game setting. So, um, tight ends are always tough because, like, you know, you got to be able to block at some degree to get on the field. You know, I think we
Yep.
talk a lot about running backs needing to be able to pass protect. Same goes for tight ends being able to run block and be able to effectively block to get on the field. You know, you can't just be a third down weapon at the tight end position and make a living. Um, so I think with Fannin, it's going to be a development phase for him. I
Yep.
still think he goes probably on day two, maybe not as high as people thinking like first round, late first round, early second round. But I think he's still a really good player that you know may not be as maybe a little bit more limited than people thought, and I think the testing is going to be huge for him.
Who's the best player in the draft?
I would say Abdul Carter. Um, I've
I've
been a
heard
big
that a
fan
lot.
of him for a couple years, and
You're asking a guy
he's
from Philly
just
here, man. Come on.
yeah, he's a guy that just is so fun to watch. First to the football, so explosive. So he checks all the boxes for me.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
many blue chippers do you have in this draft?
Probably 4 or 5. I mean, Carter. I'd probably say Travis Hunter,
I don't know.
Mason Graham. I probably still say Will Campbell, even though people were split on if he's a guard or tackle. So I would say those are the four most comfortable guys. I'd say right now I feel pretty comfortable with them
No,
being successful at the NFL level.
no Tet McMillan.
I'm not there with him. I think he's a really good player. I think he's a first round player, but I don't think he's a can't miss guy. I think there's going to be a little bit of adjustment for him at the NFL level,
Mm.
and I think he's going to need to be a much more concise route runner, and he had a little bit of some drop plot problems this year that he needs to clean up too.
Mm.
Hmm. Last year's draft, where would you had Tet if he were in that draft? Before or after Brian Thomas?
Probably right after Brian Thomas.
Okay.
And again, it probably would be it depend on what Tet does at the combine. Because to me, I was a little bit lower on Brian Thomas, like late first round on him. But seeing that true natural straight line speed, um, you know, to me, it makes sense as a top 20-25 player. So I would say probably in that range for Tet.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, man. I think Mike and I are finished up with our questions. It was a pleasure having you, Devin. Um, you know, shout out your social media really quick for the people that are watching or are going to watch this later. Tell them where they can read your content and follow your Twitter and stuff like that, and anything else you want to share.
Yeah, you can follow me at real D_Jackson on Twitter or X or whatever people call it now. And all my work is can be found at the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Awesome, man. I'm EJ Savage, Mike Guido up at the top. This is the Grid Draft Show. If you guys had fun watching, please do leave a like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can never miss any content. Also, check out the Grid channel in general. We have a lot of other shows: Bi-Coastal Baseball, my show, Boys in the Zone. We have Cowboys Can Fan, Boston Sports Summit. So many different sports shows and all different avenues. So check us out. And with that being said, we'll catch you next week. Peace.